but I'm going to do it anyway, Senator. Senator Adam Schiff is joining us. He is the U.S. Senator here from California, and many of you may know that Senator Schiff served some 12 terms in the House of Representatives for the 27th, 28th, 29th, and ultimately 30th District here in California, and became to national prominence in part when he was chairing the House Intelligence Committee, ultimately was the impeachment manager in the first impeachment of President Trump, and has been a strong voice for law and order and civil society and all the things that the nonprofit sector so much depends on. So we're delighted to have him here in this moment when, in fact, we are seeing threats like, honestly, I think it's fair to say, unprecedented, never before, coming from the federal administration and leaning heavily on our representatives to help defend civil society and the nonprofit sector as a whole. So with that, by way of introduction, Senator, I'm going to hand the floor over to you, and we thank you for joining us. We will have a few questions afterwards and some other leaders from the sector across the state joining. Thank you.
Terrific. Geoff, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for jumping on line with me today. Wonderful to see you, even if it's in two dimensions only. But let me just start out by thanking you for the extraordinarily important work you do every day. I don't think there's been a more challenging time to provide the kind of services that you provide, or a more essential one, as we are dealing with all the impacts of this new administration, as we are feeling the full brunt of the legislative agenda of the current majority impact the work of nonprofits all over the country. The effects of H.R. 1, the big, beautiful bill, as the president calls it. I have a different terminology for it. But the impacts are already immediately being felt, and the most severe impacts, though, are still to be felt, and they will be devastating if they go into full force. So let me maybe start with a little bit about the shutdown and what's happening, what the debate is about, what I am fighting for in the course of this debate. And as you all know too well, because these are the same people you serve, there are going to be millions of people unable to afford health care if these ACA tax credits are not extended and if the full Medicaid cuts go into effect. There is no amount of state backfill to make up for the loss of over $1 trillion in resources. There is no way the nonprofit sector on its own can somehow surge capacity. It is going to mean people losing their lives as a result of these healthcare cuts. And of course, the cuts go way beyond healthcare to food assistance and so much vital service for the American people. But what we have prioritized in this fight is the restoration of these tax credits on the Affordable Care Act, so that families do not see their premiums dramatically increase, and so that we can contain or try to contain at least one of the escalating costs that are driving people out of the market for health insurance. It brings me back to when we passed the Affordable Care Act. I remember doing sidewalk office hours in the Glendale Galleria, and I had someone come up to my table quite indignant and asked me how I voted for that bill, that Obamacare bill. And I said, I voted for it. And he turned around, said, I will never vote for you again. What could you possibly have liked about that bill? What could you possibly have liked? And I said, well, there were a lot of things I liked about it. I liked the fact if you had a kid who was 26 or younger, they could stay in your policy. I liked the fact that if you had a pre-existing condition, you could get health care. I like the fact that tens of millions of people that otherwise couldn't afford care are going to be able to get care. And he turned to me and said something I had never heard, even in the massive screaming town halls. When I said I like the fact that tens of millions of people who can't otherwise afford care are going to be able to get it, his answer was, and you really think that's such a good idea? And I said, well, yes, I do. Don't you? And he said, no, I don't. If they can't afford it, they shouldn't have it. And it's that ethic that we are up against. That is the idea that if people can't afford health care, an increasingly costly healthcare system, that somehow it's their fault and they should be denied access. I think that is really a fundamental aspect of what we are fighting over during the course of this government shutdown. But it's also, I think, a key element of what we are fighting for in this negotiation. This deeply impacts also the work you do, that when we agree on funding, whether it is for aid programs or education programs or healthcare programs, when we agree on funding, that agreement be observed. That is, if we decide, okay, Republicans want this funding priority, Democrats want this funding priority, we'll agree to compromise and put in both those priorities, maybe not to the full degree that we want, but when we come to that agreement on a funding bill, we need more than verbal assurances that it will be honored. Because what we have been seeing is once the agreement is reached, the administration is unilaterally refusing to spend money that Democrats prioritized in the budget, illegally impounding it or rescinding it. And they're effectively telling us in this moment, we're going to continue doing that. So you can reach an agreement with us. We don't intend to honor it. So we're insisting on language in future funding bills, including the one we're negotiating right now, that provides some guarantee that the funds that we achieve to support our constituents will remain funded and that those programs will continue. So that's a big part of what we're fighting for in this bill. But in the meantime, I know the impacts of the shutdown are reverberating through the economy, affecting the work you're doing, affecting SNAP benefits and the WIC program, Head Start. I know that the curtailment of so many other grants, many of which had already been approved, is also deeply impacting your operations. You've brought on additional staff, you've increased capacity because you've been given a grant, and now you're told that grant is being suspended, or you can't even get an answer as to what's happened with that grant. So I understand the unique challenges that you're facing. We want to work with you in every way we can to help you meet those challenges. I look forward to the conversation today about how things look going forward. How do we address the crisis that we're all facing together, but you are at the point of the spear. So thank you for jumping on, and very much look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that you mentioned a wide range of those issues that are facing us. And before I bring on my colleagues, I'm curious if you can speak to how nonprofits do show up in Washington with your fellow senators and representatives in the House, and if there's any advice you have on telling those stories and building that connection. We often hear that those in the rooms where those decisions are made, whether it be budgetary or policy driven, don't always have the direct connection or understand what's happening on the ground in communities. Are there things we could do to make sure those stories are told?
Absolutely. And, I would say there's sort of a hierarchy of the value of certain contacts. The most personal are the most effective. So when you can meet with either House members or senators in their state or in their office in DC, that has the most impact because you're able to put a human face on the services you're providing, or when you bring clients of yours, they put an even more personal face on what the way they've experienced and how they've benefited from the work you do. It has a lasting impact. It really helps concretize for people what this debate is all about. Now, that's not always possible. And so, when you can call, when you can write, all of those contacts matter. There's a perception that members of Congress are indifferent to constituent feedback. That's really not true. I think more often the case is people respond to what they hear. And if they don't hear from people, then they don't think there's much of a need, or they don't think there's much of a problem. So that communication is really important. And what's more, during the debates we've had over this, whether it's debate over the big ugly bill or debates we have every day, being able to tell your stories, being able to tell the stories of the people you serve is powerful. And right now, I know my Republican colleagues are hearing from a lot of their constituents about how their Head Start program is being affected, how the food that they need for their family is being affected, how they're not going to be able to afford their health care. And that pressure, I think, is what's necessary to drive them to the table to try to resolve this. But it's also important for those of us that are aligned with what you're fighting for to hear those stories too, to be able to tell them, to be able to help shape public opinion so that we can win these fights in Congress.
Great. Appreciate that. Thank you. I know that's something that we're always trying to find better ways to connect. So, to that effect, we have a few colleagues. We crowdsourced some questions from across the vast state of California. So I want to bring on some of our nonprofit leaders. First of whom is from Sacramento area. So Wilfredo Cruz Jr., who's the executive director at Community Resource Project, and we'll start the conversation there. Welcome, Wilfredo.
Thank you, Senator Schiff. So, as a nonprofit leader in the Sacramento region, organizations like ours are at the front lines feeling the immediate and deeply destructive consequences of the current administration's federal funding freezes and cuts, which you previously noted. These abrupt and often politically driven decisions, like the recent cancellation of millions in health grants to our region and threats to food assistance, create profound unpredictability. My question is this: beyond fighting specific cuts in the budget process, what concrete systematic federal legislative action can we, as nonprofits operating in our own communities, all champion to establish due process, transparency, and insulated funding pipelines that safeguard us as nonprofits in California from the sudden and chaotic impulsive decisions of any future administration seeking to negatively affect those of us who are serving our most vulnerable communities?
Well, I appreciate the question, and thank you for the work that you do every day. And I know that unpredictability is just so destructive and vexing. It's one thing if you're fighting to get a grant and you're uncertain whether you get it. It's another when you have a grant and you're uncertain whether you can keep it. And having long-term predictability so you can sustain your services to the community is vitally important. In the current Congress, where I'm very much in the minority, Democrats are in the minority in both houses. We're obviously not in the White House. Using legislation is extremely difficult. There are only a few opportunities to legislate fixes to the problem you described to provide some predictability. And right now, the only leverage we have is in this shutdown fight where they need our votes. And so that is why we're trying to include language in the bill to provide some predictability so that when we do get funding streams, that we can be confident that they will continue and won't be curtailed arbitrarily. You know, for the president to say and for Russell Vought to say and to use the shutdown as a pretext to say, we're going to cut Democrat programs. What they mean by that is, we're going to seek to punish Democratic constituencies in every way we can. Now, first of all, they've been doing those cuts irrespective of the shutdown. They're using the shutdown now as an additional pretext, but they've been canceling these grants to begin with. I met with the mayor of a small city outside of Los Angeles. It's a city that is, I would say, 90% Latino. And in addition to the ICE raids, they had one of their grants canceled because they used the term disadvantaged community in their grant application, which is absurd. But also, students aren't showing up in school as a result of these raids. People aren't showing up at work as a result of these raids because kids aren't showing up in school. There's a loss of revenue to those schools, and there's a real risk of implosion. And so being able to, at least with one aspect of the work you do, provide predictability, that is when you get a grant, you get to keep that grant, you get to use the resource of the grant is really vital. We're trying to build those safeguards in. The most effective tool we've had has been litigation rather than legislation, since they control everything. But by putting protective language in legislation, we improve our position in litigation. And even if we're not able to get legislation accomplished in this session, if the majority changes in Congress, we will need a whole new host of rules to prevent this kind of capriciousness in the future that you talked about. I introduced the bill last session that passed. Well, it was a couple of sessions ago, passed with a Democratic majority in the House. I've reintroduced it in the Senate. It's called the Protecting Our Democracy Act. It essentially tries to rebuild a lot of the guardrails of our democratic society that have come down. But new guardrails are coming down all the time. And some of the most important are around protecting Congress's power of the purse. That is to make sure that the funds we allocate are actually spent in the way we intended. We will work with you on language now and in the future to protect these funding streams from arbitrary rescission in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wilfredo, and thank you, Senator. We're going to go a few hundred miles south now, and I want to invite on Monica White, who knows well some of the challenges around the food system. She serves the CEO of Food Share of Ventura County. So, Monica, welcome.
Thank you, Geoff, and thank you, Senator Schiff, for being here today. As the CEO for Food Share of Ventura County, our food bank is already grappling with the cancellations of those essential USDA food shipments earlier in the year, and an increasing number of residents are facing food insecurity. The recent enactment of H.R. 1, we don't call it the big beautiful bill either, it brings historic devastating cuts to federal programs like SNAP and Medicaid. And while this was our top concern as of a few weeks ago, today's added instability of the government shutdown, it's huge. And in addition to the upcoming cuts to these crucial programs, today we're anticipating an unprecedented surge in demand, people needing food. Nonprofits like ours are the last line of defense for hundreds of thousands of Californians who are being pushed into further poverty and hunger. And as you know, nonprofits alone cannot shoulder the devastating human and financial burden of the decimation of this federal safety net. So my question is, with all of this happening today, what is it that we can do together at the federal level in partnership with the state of California to champion specific resource-based solutions and direct support of the nonprofit sector?
Well, first of all, thank you for the work you do every day. I visited food bank south of you in San Diego County just about 3-4 weeks ago, and saw the incredible work that you do, but also saw how some of those food boxes have a lot less food in them than they used to. In addition to the cuts that you've described, the administration has also done away with some of the farm to food bank programs that were also a great source of fresh produce for your clients and those you serve. But in terms of how do we ensure a reliable funding stream in the future, I think, again, it gets back to making sure that, number one, we prioritize the funding of the work that you're doing. We recognize all of the unmet need there. We recognize the fact that in a country as wealthy as this one, no one should be going hungry. No one should be going hungry. It's morally wrong and bankrupt. It's economically foolish and unsustainable. It doesn't contribute to our society and economy when people can't even have the certainty of their next meal. So we need to prioritize this in our funding, and we need to make sure, again, that when we do create these funding streams, that they are honored and maintained. At the moment, I think the fight right now is to prevent further harms. And the most immediate harms that you mentioned, that is those that are going to be occasioned by the shutdown, we are trying to fight. We are trying to fight them using litigation because, notwithstanding the shutdown, the curtailment of certain funds is just plain illegal, as is the firing of some of the federal employees who are a necessary liaison for some of these services. But more than that, we need to look for new opportunities in the future when the majority changes, when the priorities change, when we're not fighting just a defensive battle. I hope that this shutdown will be resolved soon. My sense is, though, that it won't be resolved until the president wants to resolve it, until the president believes that that he's paying a bigger political price for shutting down the government than he believes he is at the current moment. So it's important, I think, that those most affected speak out, raise the public consciousness about that, so that there is a price to be paid if the president continues the shutdown. I know that is cold comfort to those who are in need right now, but there simply isn't a legislative magic button that we can push to make this problem go away. And so I think what we have to do in this moment is figure out, okay, how do we maximally mitigate the harms today? How do we keep as much of this funding going today? Through a combination of legislative pressure, of oversight. We're doing shadow hearings. We're bringing in people who are affected. We're shedding a spotlight on what's going on, and litigation, using the courts, where we're winning a lot. Now, when we get to the Supreme Court, God knows what happens. But even delaying the harms is important and valuable. And then hopefully we get to a place where we can go on the affirmative, go on offense, and expand the services that we're able to provide, and the resources and the certainty and the reliability of what we provide to enable your really important work. So I wish I could point you to, hey, there's a pot of money here or there's a pot of money there. There's nothing they can do to stop it. That doesn't exist. There are, even with the programmatic cuts they've made, when we get back to a normal world, if we get back to a normal world, individual House members and senators through the appropriation process can direct funding to really important community-based efforts. When you apply for grants, let us know so we can support them. And if you have grants now that are frozen, reach out to us. We've had the experience that when people and organizations overseeing grants have had their grants frozen, and we intervene with the agencies, sometimes those frozen funds get unfrozen. Now, obviously, we can't tell them what to do, but sometimes, shedding the additional light on it can help free up some funds. And not just with Alex and myself at the Senate level, but reach out to your House members and include your Republican House members. Don't assume that because they voted for H.R. 1, they're not going to be willing to help you unfreeze a grant. So reach out to your representatives, because there are times where we are able to very specifically help with a particular grant.
Thank you, Senator Schiff. We'll keep up the fight if you do.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Monica. So finally, I want to head inland here to the Inland Empire and bring on Susie Gomez. She serves as the CEO there at the Inland Empire Community Collaborative, and also as a board member with us at California Association of Nonprofits. Susie.
Good morning. Thank you, Geoff. An honor, Senator Schiff. So the nonprofit sector here in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, Riverside County, already is fighting to serve our communities with fewer resources than our LA and coastal neighbors. And like many nonprofits, we're trying to understand the impact of the series of executive orders, H.R. 1, divisive political rhetoric attacking our civil society and the work we do, and threats to our nonprofit exempt status for serving missions deemed unfavorable by this current administration. The intention seems to create immense legal and operational instability for most smaller, mid-sized nonprofits and leaders of color. Given this aggressive, sustained, and multifaceted assault, my question today to you, sir, is what concrete legislative and legal strategies should be pursued and supported beyond floor amendments and public statements to create a more durable firewalls that shield essential California nonprofits from this kind of political weaponization of federal funding, tax laws, and more, that we can maintain the critical and vital work that we're all doing in our communities? Thank you.
Well, I think implicit in your question are really two lines of attack that you're having to endure right now. One line of attack is going after your nonprofit status, and I don't mean yours in particular, but going after nonprofits, using the enormous power of the federal government to do so, because you either don't agree or the administration doesn't agree with the mission of the organization, or personnel involved with the organization, or funders of the organization. And it's just an act of political or other vengeance, retribution, or censorship.
Right.
And the other facet of it is, because I think that first issue really goes to the threat to our democracy. That is, we see the administration going after universities and withholding federal grants. We see them going after law firms and threatening repeal of access to courthouses if they represent clients that the administration doesn't approve of. We're seeing the administration tell companies who they can hire or not hire. We're seeing the administration, through the regulatory process, pressure media organizations to cancel late night comedians or to pay the president personally if they want to continue to air or have a broadcast license or get a merger approved. We're seeing the Justice Department weaponized against perceived enemies of the president or of the sort of the cultural agenda of the administration. So the attack on nonprofits is a part and parcel of that broader attack, an effort to silence and intimidate the president's critics or the administration's critics or those who are not fellow travelers in their cultural agenda. But there's also the broader kind of censorship agenda. It is really astounding to me that a party that once claimed to be anti-censorship and took great umbrage at being censored should now be such an agent of censorship, where if you use the term disadvantaged communities or at-risk communities, or God forbid you use the word diversity or the word equity or the word inclusion, as if these are all horrible things that you should have your grants taken away, etc. I've never seen such a profound effort at censorship. And so we need to put in place protections so that people's rights to associate in the form of a nonprofit, people's rights to speak are protected, and there isn't an arbitrary use of the enormous power of the federal government to go after people think or speak differently. Now, I'm not optimistic about our legislative ability to do that at this moment in time. This moment in time, I think the only really effective remedy we have is litigation. Most of these efforts are unlawful, but here's the thing. Does your nonprofit, and I don't mean to single you out, and this is a rhetorical question, but does your nonprofit or the vast majority of the nonprofits on this Zoom, do they even possibly remotely have the resources to fight an administration that is determined to take away your tax-exempt status? So you may have a perfectly airtight case to defeat this effort, but do you have the resources to fight the federal government for years? And the reality is, no, you don't, and they know it. And this is why I think it's been so important that we have seen nonprofits speak out jointly. There is safety in numbers. And really across all of our institutions, there's a problem that people refer to as the collective action problem. They go after one university and all the other universities think, if we just keep our head down, maybe they won't notice us and our academic freedom. They go after one law firm and all the other law firms think, there but grace, with the grace of God go I, and we don't want to speak out because we'll be targeted next. Well, that doesn't work. It simply means that one after another, administration silences its critics. The only way out of this conundrum is for people to stick together, organizations to stick together, to litigate together, to speak out, to defend each other. That's how we get through this crisis our country is going through right now. But for the near term, these impermissible efforts to take away tax-exempt status or to defund programs or grants because they use perfectly appropriate, perfectly lawful terms need to be resisted in court. And we're having a lot of success in court. And I think even though who knows what happens when things get to the Supreme Court, I don't trust that court, sadly. It's become a partisan institution like everything else. But if we can delay the harms, we can mitigate the harms until legislatively we can end the harms.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your listening to us today and your advocacy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. And thanks, Senator. I believe we have a few more minutes. You can certainly correct me. I know there's plenty on your list today. But we do have, first of all, in some of the questions in the chats that are coming through, a lot of appreciation, first of all, for you continuing to advocate in the ways that you do. So thank you on behalf of all of us here for that. I think there's a couple of folks looking forward to what happens after the power does shift ultimately in Washington. And one of the questions, and several of them kind of linked there that I'll articulate, is how do we look ahead to all those agencies that have been decimated And in particular, one example here is that the Office of Community Services under the Administration for Children and Families have now fully laid off their entire staffs. What strategies are you looking to, and what can be done to rebuild, restaff when the time comes that that's possible?
Well, I think that rebuilding will occur. It will take place. And, my heart goes out to all of these important agencies and all those who worked in those agencies that have gone through the trauma of seeing, in some cases, their life's work disappear overnight. I remember early on in this crisis talking to people who worked on foreign assistance, who worked with USAID, and I met some of the most incredible public servants affiliated with USAID. I remember being in Afghanistan and talking to a 20-something young man who had been on the ground in Afghanistan for only a few months, but had already signed up for a second year. It was a one-year post. And I said, wow, you like it here so much, you've already signed up for a second year after only being here for a couple months? And he said, no, it's not that so much as we're in the development business and you really can't see the fruits of your effort in a single year. I want to see the results of my work here. And that's the kind of public service oriented people who are working in the space that you're working in, that a lot of federal employees are working in. They're not in it because they're going to get wealthy doing it. If they thought they were terribly misguided. No, they're in it because they have a passion for it and they have a passion to serve. And to see people have given of themselves so much like that, treated so shabbily, and to see how many people so reliant on the services you provide being left high and dry, and for the reason that my colleagues across the aisle wanted to take that money away from them, and the food away from them, and the healthcare away from them, to fund a tax cut for really wealthy people. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. But the pendulum has swung so far in one direction, it will swing back. There will be a chance to rebuild, and I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. A lot of the harms are going to be enduring. A lot of our partners are not going to trust us. Many are going to wonder, okay, you're able to provide these services now, but what happens when another administration rolls into town? How do we provide some certainty, some continuity? I think really only the passage of time will answer that question. But I am fully anticipating us rebuilding what's been broken down and torn down, establishing new guardrails so that no future president administration can so willfully, sometimes gleefully, violate the law. But I do want people on this Zoom to have the optimism that I have, which I know is in short supply these days, that it's not always going to be like this. I think when you're in crisis and our country is in crisis, it's hard to see how it ends. Sometimes it's difficult to see even if it will end, but it does end. This too shall pass. But we have a mission right now to try to minimize the harms while we go through this until it passes, and then we will rebuild. And hopefully we will rebuild better and even stronger than what we had before.
Great. Well, here's to that. There are two things that have been brought up, and I'll maybe close on this. We'll let you go. One is, you have referred many times to the power of the courts as one of our best tools at this moment. And I didn't mention this during the introduction, but some folks may know that you were previously an assistant U.S. attorney and have decades of experience using the law as a tool for these things. Are there tools that, I mean, given that we are in California, and we have a much more friendly legislature and leadership and Department of Justice here relative to some states, to the sector and to civil society. And I will share that one thing we just recently had a big success in here, if you may already know this, but AB 1318, a bill signed by Governor Newsom just days ago, would actually, now it is on the books and defends the nonprofit status in California to the extent that we in a state have the power to do so. And we sponsored that bill working with Assemblymember Mia Bonta. And so that's a tool within the state, and several of our guests here are asking, what can the state do legally, politically, otherwise? We all know there's no general fund solution to filling the gaps on the money side right now, but what other tools from a legal perspective might be valuable from where you sit.
Yeah.
We could use at state.
Well, first of all, on the funding question, you're obviously right when you say there's no amount of state backfill that's going to hold you or the people you serve harmless.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, in the state, like at the federal level, there's a competition for resources. So your voices at the state level are super important right now because everybody's competing for fewer dollars, and you're representing some of the most in need folks anywhere in the state. So continue your work with the state to make sure that the legislature and governor prioritize the needs of our most vulnerable residents. But in terms of tools, we are in such uncharted territory and vis-a-vis the federal government, hostile territory, that it calls on us to explore a whole range of options that we never thought we would need to do. To give you one example, I don't know that people can trust, and it's an astonishment to me to hear myself say this. I don't know that people can trust the recommendations coming out of the CDC when it comes to vaccines. Now, previously, I would hear conspiracy theorists say something like that because that was confined to the realm of conspiracy theory. But today, the conspiracy theorists are the members of the Vaccine Advisory Committee. And what California has done as a result is say, okay, if our citizens can't rely on CDC for the recommendations, we're going to establish our own science-based commission to make recommendations to Californians. That was never necessary before, but it is necessary now. And it may very well be that we have to enact protections for Californians when their federal rights are taken away from them, to ensure that Californians are protected from harmful policies of the administration. There are limits, legal limits to what we can do. Some of the things that we might like to do might be preempted by federal law. There is, of course, a great collision between where California is coming from and the federal government when it comes to issues like immigration. But within the domain that we have that is not preempted by federal law, we are doing what we can and must do what we can to help protect people. So there are lots of opportunities to think creatively with our state government. The biggest challenge of them all is one I think the governor referenced some time ago. This is a very difficult nut to crack, and that is the administration right now is withholding funds from blue states. They're canceling grants in blue states. They're canceling projects. This happened long before the shutdown. Long before the shutdown, for example, they announced they were canceling Army Corps of Engineers flood control projects in California. Now, why on earth would they do that? Is flooding only a problem in red states? Do we only care about people who are flooded in one part of the country? No president before this one has ever thought that way, but that's the way this president is thinking. And we are a donor state in California. We send a lot more to the federal government than we get back. And if the administration is taking the position, we're not even going to give you what little we give you to begin with, it does prompt California to think, then why are we sending so much money back to the federal government? If we need to take care of our own because you're not helping anymore, then what does that say about the relationship between our state and the federal government? And that is a big problem. But there may be pieces of that we need to figure out ways to solve so that we can keep more of our own resources. And it may be something at the intersection of state and federal tax law. So we can keep more of our own resources to help our own citizens if we have a hostile federal government and a president who views himself as only a half president, that is only representing half the country.
Well, I'm delighted to hear you say that. We just yesterday had a whole webinar on HR1, and one of the things we reminded folks of at the beginning is that California is in fact a donor state to the tune of more than $80 billion to the net positive. So we appreciate that leverage is real. So I know we need to let you go, Senator. Any final words? We're going to thank our panelists and give folks some closing comments about what happens between now and our special election and, of course, midterms. But anything you would like to say to folks before we let you go?
Well, I just want to say again how much I appreciate what you do. I've had the opportunity throughout my time in Congress and as a state legislator before that to visit many of you and your organizations and to see the incredible work you do, how it comes from the heart and how vitally important it is to people's, basic survival needs. So thank you for what you're doing. And as one of your representatives mentioned earlier in the Zoom, when she said, we're not going to give up the fight if you don't, I'm not giving up the fight. I'm more determined than ever to fight to make sure I take care of my constituents in California, that I push back against this increasingly authoritarian form of government we have, that I protect our rights and freedoms. So I'm more determined than ever. And I also believe, as I mentioned earlier, that we will get through this. We cannot give in to a kind of despair that leads to paralysis. We have to understand we're going to get through this. And prior generations had to do a lot more, frankly, to preserve our democracy. They had to go off to world wars to do it. We don't have to do that, thank God. But nevertheless, we have the same obligation to future generations that our parents and grandparents had. And we have to do our part. And I know you are every day. And I want to thank you again and let you know you have a strong partner in that fight.
Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate you being there fighting the good fight on our collective behalf here in California. So we'll continue to we'll be in touch, as they say, about all the things, the work happening. I want to thank you. I want to thank our three fellow question askers, panelists, Wilfredo Cruz, Monica White, and Susan Gomez. And I just want to remind us in closing today, we are just a short few days away from a special election here in California on November 5th. And so get out the vote is always on our minds, and anything you can do to encourage yourselves, your colleagues, your volunteers, your staff to vote with their mission, a longtime campaign of ours at CalNonprofits, please do. We also, of course, are now counting down to the midterms next year, and we'll see what lies between here and there. But on behalf of all of us here at CalNonprofits, again, thank you to Senator Schiff. Thank you all for joining us, and we will continue to share whatever information we can to give everybody the tools we need to build the power that the nonprofit sector truly has and deserves to have on behalf of all of our communities. So thank you so much, and we will be